have a young lady who I've known for 15 years. I've watched her grow up. I've watched her do some tremendous work in the community. When Oscar was first killed, it's no surprise that she saw what happened and it propelled something in her even greater. It's no surprise that you would see her on television in the streets fighting to obtain justice for my son, and years since obtaining justice for other son. It's no surprise to see her going across this country, sharing with others what they could do to ensure justice for their child, and how to galvanize a movement to bring the community together to ensure that your family member is not forgotten about, and to also work to help to bring justice for that child. I remember when Kat shared a poem, what should she tell her 4-year-old daughter at the time? And that was 15 years ago when she shared that poem. So I often and will never forget that, Kat. So I would like for you to share a little bit about yourself, and then I want to ask you a few questions.
I'm emotional already. It's been a long walk together. My name is Kat Brooks. I am the co-founder and executive director of the Anti-Police Terror Project. We've been existent for 15 years. We were born out of the struggle for justice for Oscar Grant. We were born out of asking the question, why have we just decided that this is a paradigm that we have to live in? Why have we just accepted that our only option is to respond to state terror? What would it look like to try to stop it from happening in the first place? And to Mama Wanda's point, we also asked ourselves what was happening to the families. I heard somebody earlier say it wasn't like it is now, right? And so what was really happening was that well-meaning activists like myself were slapping the faces of your murdered loved ones and taking to the streets and not even being in conversation with you, not really realizing at that time that after they murdered your loved one, they then targeted you if it even looked like you were going to speak up. I've been an organizer my whole life, my entire life, adult life. I'm also a playwright, actress, and director. And you're right, when they murdered Oscar, something shifted in me. And that's all I've been doing ever since.
So, Kat, there's a quote by you that speaks to the power of Black motherhood, our activism and political power. And I'll read the quote. It says, "Our job as Black mothers is to keep pushing the liberation ball down the court. Our obligation is to leave the world better for them and to ensure that they are equipped with the tools that they need to fight. I tell my daughter all the time, and it's harsh, but we don't live for I, we live for we." And then I want to ask you, in that fact, "we live for we," which became the title of a book by a journalist, can you elaborate on the meaning of that statement?
I can, and then I can actually talk about the evolution in my thinking since I made that quote. Capitalism, right, white supremacy, it teaches us I. And that all we should be thinking about is I. All that matters is, I. But that's not our way. That's not Black folks' way, right? We actually, just in order to survive in this country, we are complicit in our own oppression, and we're living by our oppressors' values. And it also allows folks to bury their head in the sand. I also believe deeply that part of how we get free is by building strong Black families. And that it was my job to pour into my child everything I could in order to equip her with the tools she needed to survive, expand her view to knowing that every day that she got up, she had a responsibility to fight for her people, right? And to push back on this idea of I, no matter the cost, to everybody else. Then it was her senior year in high school. I also used that quote as an explanation to her why she hadn't seen me all week, as I talk about in that poem, right? That I would be in rallies and meetings and traveling. Then she became a senior in high school. And then I heard the clock start to tick really loud in my head. And so I wish that actually, I haven't thought of the new pithy way to say it, but I think there's got to be a balance, right? Like you and I have talked about even the toll on our physical health and mental health, our emotional health, also our familial health, right? Like she sacrificed without a choice to the movement.
You know, just listening to you say that and the word I'm thinking about a scripture in the Bible, which many of us may be familiar with and we may not be. And that scripture talks about the importance of the entire body. In other words, my hands can't do what my feet could do. My ears can't do what my eyes could do. My mouth can't do what my nose could do. So each part of my body is so necessary, right? And so when we talk about that balance that you're talking about, I know that balance is so very important, because I have met families who have lost their loved one, and because of the loss, there has been an imbalance, right? So now they focus on the one that's lost, right? And they're not really focusing on the one that's still alive. And so because of that imbalance, the one that's still alive begin to act out and begin to be crying for the attention, right? But because we're so focused on the one that's not here, we don't see and understand why the one that's here is acting out the way that they're acting out. And it's in a sense kind of what you was alluding to, where we have put our focus all on this, right? And now we forgot the necessary, essential part of our body. And so having that balance, right, is so very important. And I know as you was talking, and I received that in my spirit, that now has something that you look back on and you see and you say to yourself, where was the balance, or was there a balance, or there was no balance? And if ever I had to ever do this again, how could I shift and have that balance? So what could you say to families in regards to having balance now where you may not have had balance then?
Yeah, I don't know if I've achieved balance, but I will say this, a couple of things. One, I don't want to discount the way the community showed up as we. So there were the Brother Terha Ak, who was doing our security at that time, literally pulling people out, tear gas and flashbangs as we were at war with the Oakland Police Department. And his wife, who's now a council member in this district, Carol Five, Carol became a mama, right? So she stayed home with the babies. She did the cooking. She did all of those things. I would say about those families, right? If we were living collectively as we used to do, right? Who on the block would have been able to be like, this mama is in grief. How do I hold down this child, right? So how do we think outside of the box to build a better whole of we? And then on top of that, I guess what I would say is maybe just one day a week. Even if it was just one day a week, that was about me and my baby. Just one day a week where I wasn't answering the phone or taking a meeting or sending out emails, or just one day. I mean, 18 years of those one days, would have been a lot of days.
And I think that's something for us here to really take that one day, for ourselves, right? I'm not going to answer the phone. I'm not going to try to troubleshoot or however you want to say it, someone else, but I'm going to get that balance for myself, because as family members sometimes, or as losing your loved ones, you get throughout into this life that you had not planned. You get throughout into activism. You get throughout into trying to get justice for your child. Then you get throughout into trying to help others, right? And then you find yourself 15 years later, wow, was all of this worth it, you might say to yourself, right? I have, families, they're saying, wow, was it worth, now my child and I, we don't have the relationship that we once had because of the loss, and I was focused on my person who's not here and my son who's not here anymore. Now we don't have the communication. Is it really worth it? So we're saying, when you talk about the we, it's so important for all of us to know that we all in this room need each other to survive. The songwriter says, I need you, you need me. We're part of one family, right? And so in your poem and in your words, we live for the we again, and you shared that with us. But for those seeking justice who don't have that we, right, for community organizing, what's your advice to them when they feel alone and they don't have anybody? There's nobody going to the courthouse with them. There's nobody calling them to check on them. There's no media. There's not even an attorney who's really there for them. What is your words for them?
I think the first thing that I want to say is that's the majority of families. Law enforcement murders upwards of 1,200 people every single year. We maybe hear about 8 or 9, maybe. I can say it is we're almost at the end of February. This year, there have been upwards of 40 people killed by law enforcement all over the country. We ain't seen a rally, a protest, or a hashtag. So that is the majority of our folks, which is, so to a couple of points, I think that's why organizations like the Oscar Grant Foundation are so important. Families United for Justice are so important. Identifying folks like the Anti-Police Terror Project that are important. And also why, as we're looking at national work, we're trying to figure out how it is not just response, but how we're creating paradigms that can be replicated so it stops happening in the first place. Churches, counseling, your friends, it's hard. I can't tell you how many family members I've had phone calls from, and they said, well, why aren't there thousands in the street behind my baby, right? Is my baby any less valuable than that baby? And it's absolute, of course the answer is no, right? In fact, your baby's life mattered as little to the cops that killed the baby here as they did and wherever we're talking about. We've got to build this movement. And I'm concerned a little bit that we've gotten, some of us have gotten more concerned with building careers than a movement. And it's not that I don't think that Black and brown people should be paid for their labor, because I do, right? I will say, though, 15 years, no one for 13 out of 15 years, APT was all volunteer while we worked 4 or 5 other jobs, right? And so I really do feel like it's on the organizers to be building movements and to be here in support of families. We say we got tools, we'll travel and train, right, for free. And so identifying those resources, strengthening the network, supporting folks like you. Yeah.
So what do you suggest to some of the families, how to kind of galvanize that movement? Those family members who are standing, I know Angela, for example, her son was not killed, but she was still trying to galvanize to get people to do the long term, right? Because we know, and we pointed out earlier that, if your child is killed, people are around for a while, they're there protesting, and then all of a sudden, the movement dies out. How do we keep this movement alive so that it doesn't die out? Like you shared that there was 40 people who've already been killed, right? by the police. And we really, how many of us have heard about those 40 people? Let's see your hands. How many have heard about the 40 people killed by the police? Okay. So
The only reason why I know that because of my radio show.
Right.
So every Thursday I do something called the State Terror Roundup, where I spend several hours looking for incidents of police murder, incidents of police corruption. Because when they murder us, that's the most egregious form of police violence. But we are terrorized by law enforcement all of the time. So we haven't heard about it. Oh, Organizing 101.
okay.
Organizing 101. And I don't know that this is necessarily what is to be beset upon a parent that has newly lost their loved one. But sometimes you got to meet the people where they're at and what they're worried about, right, in order to build those connections and movement. Intersectionality is also really important. Who is working on environmental issues in your community? Who's working on foster care issues in your community? What are the things that other Black folks or brown folks or allied folks are doing that you can align yourself with, right? The Black Panther Party, the very first thing that they did was not actually, in terms of galvanizing the community, really wasn't about the street patrols, right? There were young Black kids that were being mowed down because there wasn't a stoplight. And that's how they organized the people, right? And then we have alignment, and then we're in conversation. And then the other thing, part of the burnout is that we very rarely stop and celebrate the victories. And I know in this work that sounds weird to say, but for instance, right, after we built Mental Health First, which is a non-carceral response to community crisis, the city, they wanted their own model. And we made them do that model our way. But we never stopped and celebrated it, right? Like we never said good job, because there's always, white supremacy will keep you busy. There's always another tragedy around the corner. I think also this idea of attending to your whole self, that's another important thing, is sustainability, right? I was raised, excuse me, Pastor, but I was raised in the organizing tradition of work, smoke, drink, die, white supremacy doesn't sleep, and you shouldn't either. That has resulted in a lot of dead organizers, and dead organizers are actually not that helpful. You know, giving each other permission for us to collectively rest and breathe. I think in the 15 years doing this particular work, I think that's one of the most important things that we can do. And don't leave the media alone. Do not leave them alone. Don't leave them alone. Because that's another thing, right? There's always a more, if it leads sensational headline. You've got to keep talking about your loved one. And call people to come train you up. Call people to come stand in solidarity with you. We will.
You talked again, I still hear that word we. And so again, it's so important for us to come together and really pursue justice for our loved ones together.
Yeah.
And you've said we several times, and in seeking that, it's also important to acknowledge that in moments of grief and pain, it could be very hard to find the energy and the power to organize, to continue to seek justice. How do we create safe communities to grieve and heal at the same time and hold our criminal justice system accountable?
Yeah. So I can only talk about what we've done, right? And while we train people in our principles and values and structure, the way APTP moves in Oakland and Sacramento may not be exactly how an organization would work in terms of how they move, right? But what we did is we created various communities who were responsible for various things. We've got a policy committee, they work on policy. We've got an organizing committee, they work on organizing. We've got a first responders committee that goes out immediately when the cops murder someone and does a people investigation, right? That to figure out things that cops are never gonna tell us. That has turned into also folks that do case management. So they each have several families, and case management means, do you need us to come mow your lawn? Are you having a bad day? Do you need groceries? What material resources can we give you? And then every Sunday, we have a virtual, I think it's hybrid, family support group, right? Where families can come, and it's not just, we don't just bring them together to process their pain and their trauma. We bring them together to teach them, how does the bill get written and passed? What is organizing 101? How do you write a press release? There's some of the, Mama D is one of our families. It's also where they can go garner support for things that their backpack giveaways or whatever they're doing in their communities, right? Building like real community and real leadership, because in that leadership, in that empowerment, right, comes the healing.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Our families don't need saviors, they need skills.
Wonderful. I am just so stuck on that word "we," and so I want to give the audience time to ask questions. Is there any questions in the audience that you would like to ask Ms. Cap?
I just praise God for what you're doing, and knowing that what you're saying is not in vain. I work for NAMI, and I know it takes what you're saying to be able to come together and make a difference, and we have to get the word out. I'm 65. I've never heard of your organization. Wow. You know what I'm saying? But I live in Antioch. That's no excuse just to get the word out, because it's the women that are in these rooms here, it's about double that just in the city of Oakland that don't know that they can come together in a support group. If it's nothing but just listening. I do a healing circle. Nobody has to comment on nothing nobody else says, but they're allowed to express what they're going through and how they're feeling. And I still feel, I don't know how long ago or what, but I feel you, and you're the right person for where you are. That's aren't you saying, because God has sent you as an angel to be able to lift. I don't say that word galvanize. I don't want to say that again. But to be able to have women come together. And I praise God for you. And may your ministering angels always keep you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Can I just say one more thing, Mama? Another thing is one of the most insidious things that the state has done as we've tried to build this movement is separate families that have lost loved ones to police violence from families that have lost loved ones to street violence, right? Like that divide and conquer, if I ever have seen it, that's another way to build community. And at APTP, we say, and we work, and a lot of times, families, it's been both for them, right? So one of the things that we say often is all violence is state violence, because it's the state that creates the conditions for all of that violence to happen. And so that's another really strong place. And oftentimes there will be support groups for families that have lost their ones to street violence, right? And we encourage our families to show up there too.
And that you're so very right, Kat. But I want to say something about you before we close. So when I first met Kat, I was like, whoo, she got a lot of fire in her, right? And she, not only fire, but she was mad. She was pissed off. Can I say that? Like that. But I've watched over these last 15 years how you've taken all that and you developed it into something so beautiful. I was sharing before how from going through that process to become a butterfly, right? You go through that, you go through this developmental stage. So through that process of what happened with my son, Oscar, I see how the development of so many different people that his life has used to help them to develop into what God had originally designed for them. And so I say that to you to say that what you're doing for the community, not just in California, but what you're offering worldwide is a testament to me of what has transpired of growth in your life. And so I want to say to those that maybe don't know Kat, that if you are stuck with trying to come up with a way to galvanize, to come up with a way to learn how to get people out to help you obtain the justice that you're looking for. But justice in this real sense would be our children being here and not having to have these kind of sit-down talk meetings. But if you are in that place where you're looking and you need that assistance, reach out to her, and she can point you into the direction that would help you to galvanize what you're trying to galvanize for the justice for your loved one. And so I'm saying all to say thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you so much.
I got to get to my baby in Santa Cruz. I'll just say one last thing, if it's okay with you, Mama Wanda. Part of what is she's right, I was very angry. I said earlier we were at war with the Oakland Police Department. People remember the tanks in Ferguson. Those tanks were here. We had snipers with rifles. I was enraged, and I vibrated like that for a really long time. And I was just fight. We were in reaction mode. Part of the transformation for me started when we became to transmutation and transformation mode, right? When we created the committee where folk to go do our own investigations and be able to bring back evidence to their families. When we were developing communication protocols, when we forced the Oakland media to stop calling them suspects and start saying their name and their age, when we built mental health first, right, and have volunteers every weekend that are taking calls so you can get help for substance abuse or domestic violence and mental health crisis. When we built like that for me, and then this last thing, because we're talking about people started talking about self-care, and it made me twitch. And I couldn't figure out what was making me twitch. It wasn't just because I've been taught never to rest, but it was also because so we get messed up together and then you go over there and get better by yourself. Healing justice, we do collectively together, right? And that's why that opened me up to thinking about healing and understanding that we are never going to get free. Like the Panther Party understood you could not successfully struggle for your liberation if you were worried about a light bill or you were hungry, which is why they developed the 70s survival programs. Mm-hmm. Trauma acts for us in the exact same way. Mm-hmm. We are so traumatized we can't move, and it inhibits liberatory struggle. So if we're not addressing our trauma, then we're putting Band-Aids on gunshot wounds, and we're all about to bleed out. So, and that is, Mama Wanda, I do have to give you credit for that. Watching you and the other families, watching the commitment to healing through one of the most egregious things that this country does almost every single day. And you were still standing. If you still standing and building and praying and pastoring and healing and supporting families, I better get myself together because I got to keep step with you. I love you.
I love you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I